I told my wife, Rebecca, that my seminar had wrapped up a day earlier than expected. Unfortunately, I couldn't change my flight, so I wouldn't be back until Tuesday night. She was supposed to pick me up at the airport around 6 o'clock, but when I told her the news, she was a bit frustrated about me being away another night. However, she did say she was excited to see me when I got back. After mulling it over for an hour, I realized that I had been gone a lot recently and needed to put my wife, whom I've spent 17 years with, first. So I decided to head to the airport early and try to change my travel plans. It wasn't easy, and I almost gave up. But then I noticed a flight leaving for an airport near our town. Normally, I fly out of an airport an hour north of us, but this one was almost 2 hours south, and I'd never used it before. I checked the schedule and saw a flight was leaving in half an hour, so I went ahead and bought a ticket. I was surprised at how easy it was. An hour later, I was airborne, and 3 hours after that, I landed. I rented a car, expecting to be home by midnight. I couldn't wait to see how Rebecca would react to my early return. I figured I'd surprise her, so I didn't call her in advance. It was just before midnight when I pulled up to our house, and to my surprise, the place was dark and her car was nowhere to be seen. It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off as I brought my bag inside and unpacked. I tried calling her cell, and she picked up on the third ring. I greeted her casually, making it sound like I was just checking in. She mentioned that it was well past midnight and that she'd already gone to bed. She also told me she'd be at the airport at 6 a.m. the next morning to pick me up. I was confused. Where was she? She wasn't home, and I had tried calling the house phone but got the answering machine. She said she was already in bed and that the home phone wasn't working. She claimed a repairman was scheduled for the next day. At that point, my mind was racing. If she was in bed, why didn't I see her when I was unpacking? The whole situation seemed off. I didn't think she was outright lying, but something didn't sit right. I told her I wouldn't be on the 6 o'clock flight and that I'd be staying a few more days. I promised to call once I had the exact return time. She seemed disappointed but said she missed me and hoped I'd come home soon. I assured her I couldn't wait to see her either, but something about her tone made me feel uneasy. As I ended the call, I noticed a faint hint of laughter in her voice. That made me feel even worse. I dialed the house phone again, and it rang normally this time. I thought about picking up the phone just to mess with myself, but I didn't have the stomach for it. I went upstairs to our room, checked under the bed, and looked around. My mind raced. Where was she? By morning, I had moved the rental car to the other side of the street. Around 7 a.m., I saw Rebecca's car pull up, but this time, there was a man driving. I quickly hid in the closet by the foyer, with the door slightly cracked open, and watched. Rebecca unlocked the door, and the man followed her in. She told him she needed to change for work and would be ready in 10 minutes. He laughed and said he'd help her, but would have to make love to her again before she left. Rebecca playfully threatened to fire him for being late and teased him about how his wife thought she was the perfect secretary. I couldn't help but think about what she would say to his wife if she knew how Rebecca spoke about him. After all, Rebecca couldn't stand the guy. He'd only been with the company a couple of weeks, but they were already this friendly. He laughed and said he'd told his wife about Rebecca, adding that she was much lighter than his wife and the same age as his mother-in-law. He joked that his wife would definitely have a problem with Rebecca when she saw her. That was when Rebecca reappeared, and the two of them laughed together. She looked stunning, and the man, his name was Caleb, pulled her in for a slow kiss. I was so tempted to grab an umbrella from the coat rack and step out to confront them. Instead, I stayed hidden as Caleb suggested she spend the next night with him, have dinner, and come back by 8 p.m. He even mentioned taking her to see a lodge he was interested in after talking to the owner. Rebecca seemed to like the idea, asking him, "What if my husband comes home early?" Caleb reassured her that I wouldn't be home until at least tomorrow. He suggested I'd probably call him to arrange a pickup at the airport. Rebecca agreed, mentioning that I was a SEAL, meaning I'd just apologize to Caleb for any inconvenience. At that point, Caleb laughed and said that if he cheated, his wife would be furious. Rebecca shrugged and added that fear kept most men in line, though it seemed Caleb didn't mind that much. He joked that he'd be in big trouble if he cheated, but that his wife was in Houston for now, so he felt safe. I couldn't listen anymore. My blood was boiling. Not only had my wife been unfaithful, but she clearly didn't care about me. I spent the next few hours sitting in shock, trying to think things through. Slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. Rebecca had mentioned her new boss was being transferred from the Houston office, so I needed to find out more about him. After making a few calls, I got the information I needed. His name was Caleb Johnson, and he had a wife and two kids. His family would join him in Springfield once the school year ended. I went online and found a few Caleb Johnsons in Houston. One of them, when I called, turned out to be the right one. I pretended to be Don Watson from Halifax and told his wife that we were planning a surprise party for Caleb. I said I was working with her husband's company and that they'd receive tickets to Springfield as part of the surprise. She was thrilled and asked for the details. I told her it would be tomorrow, and I'd send the flight information later. She promised to keep it quiet. Next, I called Rebecca's friends and family, inviting them to the surprise party. I told them it was to celebrate Rebecca's promotion. They were all happy to help and agreed to keep it a secret. I made arrangements with a local restaurant to provide food and drinks, and I asked them to set everything up on the veranda next to the pool. Rebecca had always wanted a party there, so I thought it would be a special touch. I left specific instructions for the caterers and told them to go around the house if the place was empty when they arrived. The next day, I arrived at the airport a half hour early. As passengers made their way to baggage claim, I spotted a couple of unaccompanied women and decided to ask if either of them was Mrs. Johnson. Just as I was speaking to one of them, I heard someone call out my name. She introduced herself as Mrs. Johnson, and I almost lost my breath when I saw her. She was striking, like someone out of a movie. I introduced myself as Gary, mentioning that my wife worked for her husband. To keep things light and avoid her getting too suspicious, I cracked a joke about how I was often teased for marrying a bigger, older woman. I quickly added that it was because my wife had more experience and there was just more of her to love. She paused for a second before smiling, and I felt a small sigh of relief. We gathered her luggage and headed to my car. When we arrived at the house at 6:30, I explained to Mrs. Johnson that the party was an outdoor celebration for her husband's promotion and a surprise birthday party for Rebecca. The caterers had finished setting up, and I was actually impressed at how smoothly everything had come together. By 7:30, everyone I invited was in place. I had them parked behind the church a block away so our driveway was clear. I gave everyone a quick rundown of the plan. I'd hide in the living room, and when Rebecca and Caleb arrived, I would turn off the patio lights as a signal for everyone to get quiet. We had sliding glass doors leading to the veranda, and the blinds could be adjusted, which helped me hide behind them unnoticed. Just before 8 o'clock, I saw Rebecca's car pull up. I turned off the lights and hid behind the curtains, creating a quiet atmosphere. I heard them laughing as they walked toward the door. Caleb, in his usual flirtatious manner, mentioned that they didn't get many moments alone before helping Rebecca remove her dress to reveal a thong. They were in high spirits, and Rebecca playfully took off the thong, commenting on how playful Caleb always was. As they continued, I turned on the light, making my presence known. Rebecca froze, demanding an explanation. I simply reminded her that this was my house. My name was on the deed. She seemed surprised at my early return, but I calmly acknowledged it. Caleb mumbled something about needing to leave, and I offered him a drink, which seemed to throw both him and Rebecca off guard. Before Caleb could respond, his wife, Mrs. Johnson, entered from the veranda, waving a large purse around. Her surprise left Caleb stammering, and he ended up about 5 feet further from where he was standing. Rebecca's mother and sister followed her in, with Rebecca still undressed. Her mother immediately started scolding her, telling her to get dressed and joking that she should consider a career in adult entertainment after the performance she just put on. I turned on the porch light, revealing that 20 other people were standing outside watching the scene unfold. Rebecca, clearly stunned, tried to regain some composure as I went outside to grab some potato salad, wings, and a beer. As I returned to the living room, I saw Caleb struggling to sit down and Rebecca trying to collect herself. The situation was ridiculous, but I couldn't help but think that Rebecca and Caleb had brought this upon themselves, and by extension, their loved ones, by making this mess. At least the truth was out. As the evening wore on, Rebecca's cousin took Mrs. Johnson to a motel, while another cousin drove Caleb to the same place. Rebecca's mother asked if Rebecca wanted to go with them, but Rebecca declined. Her mother acknowledged my likely frustration and agreed that Rebecca deserved a good scolding, but that she had probably suffered enough. After they left, Rebecca hid in the bathroom, and I heard the shower running. Sitting there eating the wings and potato salad, I reflected on everything that had happened. It was strange. Sometimes everything just falls into place. And for once, my plan had worked. Cleaning up after the party took a while, but I didn't mind. It gave me time to think. By the time I sat down with my last beer, it was well past midnight. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. Rebecca eventually came downstairs and sat across from me. I asked her if she was happy, if this was what she really wanted. Her response was defensive, pointing to the time I was caught with my boss. She wondered if people thought that's what promiscuous women do. She then said she was frustrated that I hadn't come to her if there had been problems instead of throwing a surprise party. I couldn't help but laugh. She was trying to shift the blame onto me, but I wasn't having it. I reminded her that hosting a surprise party in our house wasn't the same as being unfaithful. I also pointed out that not many people would agree with her view. Finally, she admitted something I'd been waiting to hear. She claimed that if I had been around more, none of this would have happened. She said I hadn't paid enough attention to her, making her vulnerable to Caleb's advances. I couldn't stop myself from laughing. She was trying to blame me for her own choices, trying to make me apologize for what she'd done. It was almost comical. I closed the bedroom door behind me and locked it. For the first time in a long while, I felt a wave of satisfaction. My chains were gone. I was emotionally liberated and soon to be legally free. A new life was on the horizon, and I couldn't wait to start it. I used to do it all the time, waking up an hour before everyone else when the kids were younger, just to enjoy some peace and quiet. It became a kind of personal ritual, a hobby of sorts. My name's Luke Johnson. I've been married to Lily for 25 years, and for most of that time, I thought we were happy. Well, that was until just a couple of hours ago. We have 4 kids, and the last one moved out last year. Lily started calling it empty nest syndrome, but I think she was just struggling with the idea of it. So I suggested she pick up a hobby. It looks like she found one an hour ago. I didn't know the guy's name at first. She kept calling him Dean Carter, though, and egging him on with things like, "Do it, Dean Carter," and "Come on, baby, I know you can do it." It was strange, especially since the smell of my favorite coffee brewing didn't seem to interrupt their session. Normally when I make coffee, Lily's down there before it's even ready. But today she was so absorbed in whatever they were doing that the coffee aroma didn't even register with her. There was more chatter between them. She asked him to tell her how much better he was than me, and he responded with, "Oh my God, you're so much better." Part of me considered engaging the safety on my weapon. It seemed like the cautious thing to do, just in case. After all, her lover was a cop. How did I know that? Well, when I got home early, I found his uniform and gear belt scattered across the living room floor, along with all of Lily's clothes. The sounds they were making were unmistakable. I could hear her asking him to do it harder and how she'd never felt anything like this before. Meanwhile, the bed creaked and the headboard thudded against the wall with such force that it was hard to focus on anything else. I couldn't tell exactly how much time I had, but judging by the noise and the length of their activities, it seemed like I had a while. It was obvious this wasn't their first time. I overheard Lily suggesting they should meet more often. "Damn it, baby. We need to do this 2 or 3 times a week, not just once in a while," she said. That came from my wife, or at least I thought it did. How did I end up in the middle of this mess? It was ridiculous. I'd gone to work earlier and in my rush, forgot my briefcase. No, actually, I left it in the garage while I rescued the cat from under the hood of my car. I forgot all about it after. Our second cat, Leah, had wandered under the hood. It reminded me of the time I made a terrible mistake with our first cat, Victor. One cold winter morning, I didn't tap on the hood before starting the car, and that was the end of Victor. You'll never forget the noise a cat makes when it gets caught in a fan belt. It's a sound that sticks with you, the kind of sound that makes you sick to your stomach. Victor wasn't quick enough to avoid it, and neither was I. But back to the present, I wasn't going to bother going back for my briefcase, even though it was sitting in the garage. I had to visit a client, and the guy drove me straight home. As I turned onto my street, I saw a black and white police car parked in front of my house. My heart nearly stopped. I assumed something awful had happened to Lily. I pulled into the driveway, almost hitting her new silver Lexus LS sedan. Her stupid plaster garden gnome didn't get so lucky. I didn't even bother closing the car door before I ran into the house. That's how I ended up standing there, staring in horror, while I heard her voice shout, "Take me now, stud. Make me feel good." God, this is amazing. Instead of the warm, familiar smell of coffee filling the house, all I wanted was whiskey. But I figured I'd need a clear head. Their loud moans and cries were hard to ignore. But I stayed. I had to see it, record it even. Honestly, watching them in my bed wasn't even the worst part. It wasn't just the physical act that made my stomach turn. It was the verbal humiliation. Lily was practically gushing about how much better he was than me. "God, you're so much better than Luke," she said. It seemed to turn him on even more, and suddenly the whole house started shaking, the bed creaking even louder as their moans filled the air. It's a shock, let me tell you, when you walk into your own home and find your wife in your bed with another man, especially when that bed is supposed to be sacred. And yes, they did it on my side. Lily was riding him cowgirl style, telling him how much it turned her on. That's when I ran to the bathroom and threw up my breakfast. Honestly, I was surprised they didn't hear me. Then again, they were too busy with each other. Even now, it's hard to wrap my head around it. I mean, Lily's 50, and the guy she's with is probably no older than 30. He's in fantastic shape, while Lily, well, she's not. I'm no fitness model myself, but I could understand if she wanted someone more like her. But this, it didn't make any sense. The whole thing dragged on forever, but finally, after what felt like 90 minutes, it got quiet. I figured they were taking a break. Then I heard Lily ask, "What's that smell?" Her lover didn't answer right away, but then I heard her exclaim, "Oh my God," followed by a bunch of shuffling noises, closet doors opening and closing, dresser drawers being pulled out, laundry baskets being upended. They were clearly trying to clean up, cover their tracks. I made a mental note to get tested for STDs just in case. It was a matter of time before they noticed me. Sure enough, when I stepped into view, Lily gasped. So did her lover. He looked at his uniform, glanced back at me, and seemed like he just wanted to disappear. Then, as if it wasn't bad enough, I heard him mutter something about his service arm. He couldn't find it, and his face twisted with panic. He started searching through the mess on the floor, frantically checking the pile of clothes. It wasn't there. The worst part, he was clearly upset because the serial number had been removed. And that's when it hit me. This cop, this stud, had just gotten himself into deeper trouble than I could have imagined. Like I said, he's a thoughtful guy. We had a pretty decent conversation while you two lovebirds were busy upstairs. Lily gave a quick glance out the window, looking toward the street. "Yeah, he took the patrol car too," she said. "Your boss mentioned you were supposed to be on security at the construction site. He was going to grab your uniform, but figured you might need it when you leave here. So where was I? You could try calling your wife for a ride home, but she's probably not in the mood. She was pretty upset after I sent her that video. I had sent the video to her, and it was hard to make out what she was saying, but it had something to do with her father, the chief of police. How could you do that to your kid?" she told me, clearly hurt. "She mentioned your family, though, and it sounded like you had a pretty nice one, considering the mess you were in." At this point, I was almost enjoying myself. It felt like I had a fish on the line, and I was just reeling it in. "I'd offer to have my wife give you a ride, but her car's been impounded," I added casually. Lily's eyes widened. "What? Your car was impounded?" she squealed. "Yeah, Lily. They found a couple of ounces of unaccounted marijuana in the front seat. Sergeant Ian said they usually just write a ticket, but he felt they owed me for all the trouble the police caused me. Don't worry, though. He said you'll probably be able to pick it up in a few days, after they finish their forensics." "Oh my God," she moaned. But it wasn't a scream. It sounded more like the sad whine of a lonely hound howling at the moon. I wasn't feeling too sympathetic. "Well, officer, I think it's time for you to put your uniform back on and leave," I said, signaling for him to go. And he did. Once he was gone, my wife regained her voice. Please, Evie, I love you. It didn't mean anything at all. It was just a fling, or something like that. Man, I wish you'd told me that sooner, I replied, feeling the sting of betrayal. I was starting to think you loved him and were going to divorce me. Now I just feel bad for overreacting. She looked at me like I was an idiot. You know I love you, Luke. Of course I love you. Why would you doubt that? I couldn't help myself. Well, I don't know. Maybe the whole infidelity thing? Sleeping with your lover on my side of the bed? Calling me a stupid idiot? Covered in crayon? There were a few signs, you know. She tried to backpedal. Oh, honey, I didn't actually do that. It was just bedroom talk to get us in the mood. Then she paused, looking confused. Wait, you said you overreacted? Luke, what did you do? At this point, she seemed to snap out of her shock and was on high alert. I knew she was listening, her nerves on edge. Well, I thought you didn't love me anymore, I said, not backing down. So I sent the video to the kids. Just wanted them to see who their new daddy would be. She looked horrified. Oh my God, you didn't. I nodded. I forgot to mention one more thing, though, I continued. But you probably already know. Your lover's wife works for the same company as you. She's an executive assistant to the CEO, I think. Don't worry, I told her not to fire you in case you end up getting transferred to Little Rock. I also spoke with my lawyer, and since you make more money than I do, you'll be paying me child support for the next few years. Around $3,000 a month, probably. I saw her face drop, but I kept going. I know most cheaters try to be all macho and avoid paying, but that's not me. I plan on taking some time off, going on a long fishing trip to cope with the pain. You know, deep sea fishing in the Gulf of Mexico. That should help me heal. Her expression shifted to one of confusion and concern. You sent a picture of me to your lawyer? She asked, obviously shocked. I sighed. Well, yeah, she mentioned needing it for some reason. Maybe to show to your father or to have in case any cops wanted to, do something bad. Or maybe just to see if anyone else wanted to date you. Either way, I gave her one. Oh, and I also shared the video with your parents and your coworkers. She looked furious now. Why were you so harsh, Luke? I shrugged. I wasn't trying to be harsh. I just wanted everyone to know who your new partner is. Your friends on Facebook seem pretty happy for you. By this point, Lily had almost shut down completely. She sat on the floor, wrapped in a sheet, crying and shaking her head, murmuring to herself, "This can't be happening to me." "All right, dear, it's time to get dressed and pack your thing," I said, breaking the silence. "Your parents should be here soon to pick you up." Her head snapped up. "Pick me up?" she repeated as if the idea of leaving hadn't occurred to her. "Of course, sir," I said. "You'll need somewhere to go. The house will have to be sold as part of the divorce." She stared at me, still clearly in disbelief. "Divorce? You, you want to divorce me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Surprised? What did you expect to happen when I found out? You didn't think I'd catch on?" For a moment there was silence. She didn't speak, just quietly sobbed in the corner, muttering every now and then. "I guess cheaters always cry when they get caught," I said, more to myself than to her. "It's a real shame. If getting caught is so bad, maybe you shouldn't have cheated in the first place." About 10 minutes later, she came downstairs, dressed but without a suitcase. "Luke, honey, we're really—" Then I heard the sound of her parents' car pulling up in front of the house. "Farewell, Lily," I said, standing by the door, holding it open for her. Always the gentleman. Now, on to the next part. That evening didn't go as I had hoped. The house was eerily quiet, and I couldn't find my wife, Helen, or our kids anywhere. After a while, I found a note on the table. "Mike, I'm sorry. I can't say this to your face because I'm too much of a coward. I've met someone else, and I've fallen in love. The kids are with me and safe. The divorce papers are in the envelope under this note. I'm not asking for anything." Naturally, my world came crashing down in an instant. I started pacing around the kitchen, swearing under my breath, flipping through the divorce papers. Then I just collapsed into a chair. Helen was leaving me. The house, the money, everything, except her clothes, the kids, and their toys. The worst part, though? She wanted me to sign adoption papers for my kids, allowing her new partner to adopt them. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. It was a done deal. At least now I knew who she left me for. Nathan Brooks. I decided to call her. "Hey, Helen," I said, keeping my voice even. "Hi, Mike," she replied coldly. "What's happening?" I asked. She started explaining the situation, just like she had in the note. She had met someone else and fallen in love with Nathan Brooks. I didn't buy it. "Yeah, of course you did. No one just leaves a marriage and falls in love with another guy. I just hope it wasn't in our bed." She told me to stop swearing and act civilized. After hanging up, I went out to eat since cooking wasn't on my mind. The food was okay, but I needed a drink, so I went to a bar. After the day I had, I figured I deserved it. Simon, a friend of mine, spotted me. "Haven't seen you out in a while," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Managed to get away from the family?" I nodded, telling him I'd come back to an empty house and a stack of divorce papers. Simon couldn't believe it. "Helen's divorcing you?" he asked, shocked. I confirmed it and told him that she'd moved in with Nathan Brooks. Simon was floored. "The Nathan Brooks? The one who owns Brooks Construction?" "Yeah, that one," I said. "And I'm pretty sure she's in love with him." He asked what my plans were. "I'm going to give her the divorce," I said. "She doesn't want anything, but there's another form she wanted me to sign, and I just tossed it aside." Simon looked curious. "What was it?" I explained. "She wanted me to let Nathan adopt the kids. Not going to happen." Simon shook his head. "That guy's a piece of work." I couldn't agree more. "Yeah, well, I was supposed to start working for him on Monday, but I found another job instead." The divorce went through eventually, despite Helen's pleas. She gave up, and that was that. When it was all over, Chloe was 10 and Lee was 8. I wanted to get back at Brooks, but I wasn't stupid enough to land myself in jail over it. I decided to just not show up for work that Monday. Strangely, no one seemed to press me about it. But in a way, my revenge on Brooks was already in motion without me even being involved. It all started with my conversation with Simon. Word spread, and most of the local contractors refused to work with him. They saw how he treated me, so they turned down his projects. He had to hire out-of-town contractors, and the quality of work was poor. 6 months later, my divorce was official. 3 months after that, Helen and her new partner, Goya, got married. I took care of the kids while they went on their honeymoon. Not because I wanted to help, but because a week with them was better than the weekends I was stuck with. What bothered me, though, was the question my daughter Chloe asked. "Daddy, why did you send us to live with Mom and Nathan?" I looked at her. "I didn't send you anywhere. Your mom took you because she doesn't love me anymore. If it was up to me, you'd still be here with me," I answered, trying to clarify that it wasn't my choice. "I plan on talking to your mom about this when she gets here." When Helen showed up to pick them up, she was all tanned and cheerful. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Stop lying, Helen," I said as I looked her in the eye. "Tell the kids the truth. They know I didn't send them to live with you. And if you don't tell them, I will. I'll fight for custody if I have to." She walked away, frustrated and probably feeling the heat of my words. Life as a single man was strange after being married for so long. Some of my friends tried setting me up on dates, but I wasn't interested. I wanted love, but dating? That didn't seem right. Little did I know, things were about to change. My neighbors Gary and Rebecca had moved in just after Helen left. Their house was a great deal but needed a lot of work. Rebecca worked as a secretary, and Gary was retired from the Army. We got along well, had good neighborly chats whenever we crossed paths. Then tragedy struck. Gary had a sudden health crisis at work. Paramedics arrived quickly, but Gary was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed it was a subdural hematoma. Rebecca was left devastated. She had no one to turn to since her parents were on vacation. I offered my condolences and walked her home, pouring us both a drink. I listened to her as she cried, sharing her future plans. She fell asleep on my couch, and I stayed up in a chair just in case she woke up during the night. The next morning, as Rebecca was leaving, Helen was dropping off the kids. She looked at me and said, "Good to see you're not wasting any time, Mike." I couldn't believe her insensitivity. "Helen, the poor woman just lost her husband," I shot back. She glanced at me but quickly turned to talk to the kids. After the funeral, Rebecca invited me to dinner, and I went. Thankfully, in the UK, mortgages are insured, so Rebecca wouldn't be destitute, though that didn't ease the pain of her loss. Her parents returned from Europe shortly after, and they thanked me for being there for Rebecca. I promised to look out for her, as she had no one but me. I even offered to help with small household tasks, making sure her place stayed livable. The next time Helen came to pick up the kids, she stayed in the car, which was fine by me. I had no interest in talking to her. Rebecca and I spent a lot of time together over the next year, not as a couple but as friends, supporting each other through difficult times. One day Lee was chatting with Rebecca in the garden, and I called out to him not to be a pest, but Rebecca assured me it was fine. As she hung laundry on the clothesline, I invited her over for dinner. Lee was excited, and we all laughed together. After dinner, Rebecca helped me clean up, and I could see she was good in the kitchen. She stayed for a while before heading home. As she left, Chloe asked me, "Is Rebecca your girlfriend?" I smiled and replied, "She's just a friend, Chloe," though secretly I thought it would be nice if she were more. The next time Helen picked up the kids, she was particularly interested in Rebecca. I told her it was none of her business, and that Rebecca was just a friend and neighbor. Helen retorted that she didn't get everything she wanted. I fired back, "You left me for a life of luxury with him. He can have his own kids if he wants them, but you're not adopting mine." I could see the frustration on her face, but I just smiled, knowing I'd gotten under her skin. A year later, I hadn't seen much of Rebecca, partly because I'd been busy. Simon had me working on a plumbing rewire for a young couple's house, and I had my hands full with that. But Simon kept me updated on what was going on with Brooks. He was still struggling. Most local contractors refused to work with him, so he had to rely on non-local guys, and the quality of his work was suffering. The work on the house was finally finished, but I had no idea how much things were about to change again. Finally, I had some time to relax, so I decided to take Rebecca out to dinner. She agreed, and we set it for Saturday night. When I saw her walk in, I was taken aback. Rebecca was petite, with a pixie-cut hairstyle that framed her face perfectly. The dress she wore hugged her slim figure just right, and for the first time, I felt that familiar spark of attraction. Dinner went well, and we spent hours talking about our lives, sharing stories and laughter. Later that evening, I walked Rebecca to her door, and she thanked me for such a wonderful time. Before I could even respond, she surprised me with a kiss, a passionate one that left me breathless. Afterwards, she suggested we go out again sometime to see where things could lead. She kissed me on the cheek this time and wished me good night. And we did go out again, and that night it led to us spending the night together. Despite her small size, Rebecca was incredibly passionate. It was an experience I'll never forget, a thoroughly satisfying one. As we spent more time together, Rebecca eventually sold her house and moved in with me. The kids were thrilled with my dating life, and it was obvious they'd tell Helen, who definitely wasn't thrilled about it. She didn't want me, but Rebecca did. A year after our first intimate encounter, Rebecca and I got married. When the kids told Helen, she just snorted and turned away. It was a quiet statement that said it all. She was not pleased, but she had no say in the matter. Rebecca and I went on to have 2 children of our own, Gary and Robert. My older kids were now old enough to visit on their own, which meant less interaction with Helen. Years passed. Then one day, Chloe came to me with some big news. She'd gotten engaged, and her boyfriend Josh had proposed the night before. As her father, I offered to help with the wedding expenses. Chloe explained that they initially thought they wouldn't need any help, but Nathan had stepped in and offered to cover the costs, on the condition that he would walk her down the aisle. Chloe flatly refused, and Nathan withdrew his offer, leaving her upset. I was furious with Brooks for his behavior, but Rebecca had an idea. She suggested we use the money from the sale of her house to cover the wedding expenses. I hesitated. After all, it was her money, but she insisted. She encouraged me to tell Chloe we would cover it. When I shared the news with Chloe, she was overjoyed. We worked out a budget that covered everything they wanted for the wedding while keeping us within our means. The next day, Chloe told me Nathan was furious, and Helen wasn't happy either. Then one afternoon, Lee showed up at our house unannounced. He said he wanted to leave home because he couldn't stand the constant arguing between his mother and Nathan. Rebecca asked if they were still fighting about the wedding, but Lee said it was about something else. Apparently, he had overheard some private moments between Nathan and Helen, and suggested that Nathan wasn't exactly performing well in bed. We all had a good laugh about it, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that Helen had left me for a guy who couldn't even live up to his responsibilities when it mattered. Lee decided to stay the night to avoid the conflict at home. The day of Chloe and Josh's wedding came, and things were tense. Helen didn't seem pleased, and Chloe informed her that she and Nathan would sit behind Rebecca and me during the ceremony. The church service went smoothly, and afterward I agreed to let Helen sit at the top table with us at the reception, while Nathan sat with Rebecca, Robert, Gary, and Lee. After the speeches, the caterers cleared a few tables to make space for dancing. Josh and Chloe led the first dance, and Rebecca and I joined them. Later, we found ourselves at the bar with Gary and Robert, who were chatting with one of Chloe's bridesmaids and her kids. Lee asked Rebecca if she wanted to dance, and I encouraged him to go for it. As they danced, I felt a little buzzed, but Helen took that opportunity to approach me, clearly having had a few drinks. I had a sense that this encounter wasn't going to end well. She started by commenting on Rebecca and me, remarking on how young Rebecca looked and how she hadn't aged a day, despite being the mother of two. Then she shifted to criticizing Rebecca's appearance, picking on her weight and her clothes. I reminded Helen that we were divorced, and she no longer had any right to comment on my life. But Helen wasn't backing down, so I had to. I stood my ground, defending Rebecca. "Rebecca is more of a woman than you ever were," I told her, not backing off. I even hinted at how satisfying my intimate life was with Rebecca, just to make my point clear. Helen stood there, stunned, and just then, Nathan walked up, joining the conversation. I turned to him, smirking, and said, "When you left me, you thought you were trading up. Maybe you did, or maybe you didn't, but I moved on. I have my own life now, with a loving wife and 4 wonderful children." I walked away, leaving Helen and Nathan to stew in their own awkwardness. Rebecca and I danced to a slow song, and as we did, she asked about the exchange at the bar. I told her to kiss me, promising to explain later. We shared a kiss, and I knew Helen was watching. After breaking the kiss, I looked at Helen, who turned away to order another drink. As I gazed at Rebecca, I couldn't help but think, yes, I had traded up for something better.